So, with the excitement around the new Spider-Man Brand New Day movie, I wanted to cover the age of Peter Parker throughout the MCU because I think there is a lot of confusion just in the Marvel timeline in general, and I also think Peter's age is really a significant factor for his character development in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because having him as the youngest Avenger in the past and really seeing the first trilogy cover his life throughout high school, I really think his age is such a pivotal part in his overall arc. And I also think in those prime teenage years where there's really just so much development going on, I really think this ties into a lot of the major themes of his character and portrayal throughout this universe. So in relation to that, I am going to share some of my overall thoughts on this and kind of go into how his age connects to the larger story elements of his character. So starting off where we first meet him in the MCU in Civil War, we see Tony Stark going to recruit Peter Parker in his apartment in New York. He was somehow able to get familiar with his vigilante work, maybe through the YouTube videos or the camera footage that was speculating online. But we really see Peter here at age 14, given the timing of the Captain America movie. We likely see Peter at the end of his freshman year. And this is really where we get the start of Tony Stark's mentorship of Peter Parker. And this later leads to Spider-Man playing a pivotal role in the infighting between the Avengers members at the airport hangar. And I think we really see Spider-Man being pretty reluctant at first to really embark on this new journey, but a lot of overall excitement once he is able to interact with the other Avengers members and really get into some of the action. But going into Spider-Man Homecoming, we know that this is just a few months after the events of Civil War, so this is really around the beginning or the first third, I would say, of Peter Parker's sophomore year in high school. We have the Homecoming dance being a classic fall theme for this movie, and you have a continuation of the Tony Stark mentor-like figure. And throughout the course of Homecoming, we really see Peter taking on Vulture and the Shocker and that whole group. And I think for his character, we see a pretty stark change to where he was at in Civil War. We really see him becoming really impatient in terms of his school life, in terms of his work as Spider-Man. We now see him wanting to join the Avengers right away and really kind of overlook a lot of the other aspects in his life. But I think that really leads to a much more grateful Peter by the end of this movie as we see him turn down the invitation to the Avengers, and we really see him wanting to stay local and really continue as just a street level crime fighter and to continue fighting for the little guy. And then that would really lead us into Avengers Infinity War, which is about a couple years after Homecoming. So we really see this during the later half of Peter's junior year. We see him on the school bus overseeing the Thanos invasion and then doing whatever he can to get involved and even sneaking on Thanos' ship to help out Tony Stark. And I think for Infinity War, he's more of a secondary character. You don't have too much character development here, but I do really think there is some deliberate consideration for really showing his youthfulness in terms of his moments before getting snapped away. And I really think that his disappearance with the snap is really one of the more emotional moments at the end of that film. But of course, looking at Avengers Endgame, which is about 5 years later, you do have the Avengers being able to rally back and reverse the snap. So you have Peter Parker coming back at the same age that he was at the end of Infinity War, but I really think this is where a lot of confusion can come into where exactly his age would be in the middle of this. And I think it's important to note that you have Endgame being not exactly 5 years after the events of Infinity War. You have about a 6-month, give or take, time gap to where exactly the snap took place and to where the snap was reversed. So that really would affect Peter's age. And I would say, just in terms of his physical age, that would really almost change his birthday. Because in addition to that 5-year gap, you wouldn't exactly be aging in alignment with your previous birthday, but I'm not too sure how they enforce all of that in the MCU in terms of age or identification. But we have a little bit more clarity given in Spider-Man Far From Home, which would take place about a year after the events of Endgame. And we really see this in the summer of 2024 inside the MCU. You do have the school deciding to just restart the previous school year for students that were blipped. So even though they were halfway done and took their midterms. So you have Peter pretty much having to restart his junior year, and then we find him at the end of that school year in Far From Home. But in terms of his overall character development, I think whereas in Homecoming you have Peter being impatient and then really kind of wanting to stay more where he's at in terms of his work as Spider-Man, I think in Far From Home you see him being a little bit disconnected or a little bit hesitant to really stay on top of his role as Spider-Man. But going to the end of his first trilogy, you have Spider-Man No Way Home taking place right after the end credits of Far From Home, and you have him still at 17 here, but he would be going into his senior year. We really see that through a lot of the college applications. And of course, I think you have a clever tie-in with the multiverse and a lot of the previous Spider-Man villains being brought into this one. And I really think you have a lot of darker arcs to Peter in this, but ultimately I think with his decision by the end of the film, I think you see him as a pretty selfless Spider-Man and really getting a new fresh start on his life, which is why by the end you do have him turning 18. But I think what's really interesting about this is going into the new Spider-Man movie, it does look like Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to take place about 3 years after the events of No Way Home. So you would have Peter turning 21 here. Looking at some of the early descriptions of the movie, you do have it describing Peter as working a part-time job and balancing college with his work as Spider-Man. And since this is going to take place in New York City, looking at the comic history of Spider-Man, you do have him attending a fictional Empire State University school, so I think that's a possibility. But I really think you have such an interesting job with Peter Parker in the MCU, and I really think it's going to be interesting if they really continue to do a pretty in-depth look in terms of a lot of different stages in his life. But feel free to let me know your thoughts on all of this, and I'll see you later.